Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, John. And I think my good friend William forgot to mention that our agreement was that he would speak for both of us, and I would just moderate. In fact, neither he nor I had any choice in accepting the topic of this session, and we were debating as to how we're going to tackle it, but it is a very, very important topic and one that is extremely pertinent today. I appreciate William's humility when he said that he's not a citizen of this region, and if he would allow me a bit of cheeky humor, I love it when current UK non-residents of this region forget what their predecessors 1,000 years ago did. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today, and I wish to thank His Majesty King Hamad and the government and the people of Bahrain for their gracious hospitality and for the excellent organization of this landmark event, the 8th IISS Regional Security Summit. My thanks go to John Shipman and IISS for all the hard work that they have done. We listened very, very carefully last night to the emotional, sobering, and wise words of His Royal Highness Crown Prince Salman, and I think that he had certainly laid out a plan, or a cry of conscience, I should say, for this wonderful country to get over its challenges and its problems through debate and through dialogue and through interaction, and a common objective and a common vision for the future. So without repeating too much of what my good friend, the Foreign Secretary of the UK said, I want to reiterate that the region is undeniably undergoing a process of fundamental change in its respective countries, either through revolution or evolution, as was pointed out. And in our region, one could validly argue that ethnic and sectarian factors were absent, dormant, or in abeyance in our part of the world until 2003 in the context of the political dynamics of the region. There are others who would argue that this actually began in the 70s and in the 80s, or at least we saw the seeds of it back in the 70s and 80s with the civil war in Lebanon, and perhaps with the Iraq-Iran war and the repercussions of that. And there are others actually who would argue that it dates back to the early part of the 20th century, when lines were drawn in this part of the world by people not so detached from one of the panelists here. And I just want to say that it is perhaps more pertinent to say that since 2003, sectarian and ethnic factors in countries in our region whose societal compositions have diverse sectarian ethnic components have become more conspicuous and more intertwined with national and regional security. The resurgence of ethnic and sectarian politics came about in countries with diverse compositions undergoing transitions after major wars or revolutions, and in which the institutions of the state, particularly law enforcement and the military, among other institutions, collapsed, and the entire structure of the state was eroded or severely weakened. And the weakness of the state in such cases, coupled with decades of political stagnation and authoritarian rule, gave rise to sectarian and ethnic affiliations and identities at the expense of the broader national identity in such states. And the challenge for those states and their societies was to chart, and still is, to chart a course that would lead to the reinvigoration of the allegiance to the national identity of the country rather than allegiances to the sectarian identities. And Foreign Secretary Haig's point about religious belief being one component among many components when talking about national identity is extremely important. And in this context of regional security and stability, I must state that the rise of sectarianism and sectarian ethnic politics in countries with diverse ethnicities and sects in our region paved the way for certain countries in our region to play the sectarian card, so to speak, as a tool or instrument of foreign policy. And this was deployed to intervene and interfere adversely in the affairs of other states, and in a manner that is more consistent with self-serving interests rather than advancing fundamental rights of the members of a certain sect or ethnicity in the countries where interference was taking place. And we're talking about country and state players within the region and without the region. And we see examples of what is happening in our region, very vivid and live today. Look at the broad picture in the Middle East and North Africa, and there are many cases in point, whether we're talking about Yemen or talking about what's happening in Syria today. And as the Foreign Secretary said, what we are seeing today in Syria is obviously a civil war of a political nature. And our biggest fear, people in this part of the world, is for this to slide into an ethnic and sectarian type of violence, such as we saw in post-2003 Iraq. And I think this is what keeps most of us up at night. These alliances, such alliances, do not only create domestic unstable environments in the targeted countries, they also create or widen the sectarian and ethnic rift in those countries and threaten to irreversibly destroy the cohesion of the social fabric in those states. And additionally, this almost always has a spillover effect on neighboring countries that are equally diverse in their societal composition, which threatens regional security as a whole and in the broader sense, as it leads to alignments along sectarian divides between countries as well as within countries. In Jordan, under His Majesty King Abdullah II's guidance and full involvement and realization of the dangers of the emergence of sectarian, ethnic, and religious politics, we have spearheaded initiatives that aimed at bridging the sectarian divide and the religious divide too, as well as cultural diversity. Initiatives such as the Amman message of a few years ago, which tried to really put forward the very, very clear, moderate, centrist message of Islam and put together all the sects of Islam in a united position and insofar as what is acceptable and what is not acceptable are concerned. So we had the Amman message and the Common Word Initiative and many other initiatives in our attempt to try and put the elements and root causes of the sectarian divide behind us. It is extremely dangerous and short-sighted and detrimental for the international community at large and for policymakers in our part of the world to encourage in any way the emergence, solidification, or strengthening of sectarianism and sectarian politics and their malevolent employment as a tool of policy by certain countries. It should be discouraged and dismissed and rejected by all of us. There are many countries, and I think John Chipman in his introductory remarks mentioned Jordan among other countries, but there were a few examples, true examples, and there still are, I speak for Jordan, of a true melting pot type society where there are multi-cultures and people who follow different religions and different faiths and different ethnicities present in the composition of the society. And in Jordan, it is a clear example of success. And I do agree with the Foreign Secretary that the Arab Spring, or the series of Arab awakenings that we have seen since the beginning of 2011, I think the success of that would be to unite people of different ethnicities and who follow different faiths and different religions under a national umbrella with national allegiances rather than allegiances to sects, whether within the country itself or in terms of relations with other countries. And I think in Jordan, again, where we have seen a political reform process led by His Majesty the King, where dialogue and openness and an attempt to steer Jordan forward towards a parliamentary government under a Middle Eastern constitutional monarchy is a case in point here. And these examples, of course, should be encouraged and supported. The last thing but certainly not the least important thing that I want to mention is the Palestinian-Israeli and the context of the overall Arab-Israeli peace, which we believe, again, I echo what the Foreign Secretary said, is the core issue, the central issue, come what may, regardless what happens and what events we witness in our part of the world. It is the root cause of instability in the Middle East. And I believe that, as the Foreign Secretary said, that these next 50 or 60 days are extremely important as we prepare for the inauguration of a re-elected President of the United States and the Israeli elections, so that we can work together. And yes, the United States has a leading role, but all of us, stakeholders, and Jordan is a stakeholder, have a serious role to play to try to reinvigorate a substantive discussion and negotiations between the two parties, and not just another process or another open-ended process, but a timeline benchmarked discussion that will tackle and solve all pending final status issues is of utmost and paramount importance. This is, again, the root cause of instability in the region. The last thing that our troubled region needs is the creation of new lines of tension that are forged along ethnic or sectarian or confessional boundaries over and above the chronic tension that already exists due to the absence of Palestinian-Israeli peace and Arab-Israeli peace. Thank you very much.